This is a Koenigsegg Regera, and it's the luxury model in Koenigsegg's lineup, the more practical grand touring Koenigsegg, except, you know, it's still insane with 1,500 horsepower and a sticker price of more than $2 million. This is an amazing car. Any Koenigsegg is, but today I'm going to review this one. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era. We've had some amazing sales recently on Cars and Bids, including this Ferrari 575M, which sold for just under $131,000, a great number for a great car with the HGTC package. We also recently sold this E92 M3 for $71,000 with only 3,000 miles, and this beautiful E30 M3 sold for just under $60,000. Gorgeous and special car. If you're looking to sell your cool car from the 1980s or up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. You'll get the most money and the most interest in your car. And if you're looking to buy a cool car from the modern era, we have daily auctions with great selection at carsandbids.com. I've borrowed this Koenigsegg from the Triple F collection, which is a truly amazing car collection here in Ohio with some spectacular cars. Koenigsegg, Ferrari F40, Pagani, new Ford GT, McLaren, they've got it all. You can follow the Triple F collection on Instagram, and it's actually one of my favorite follows because they really use all their cars. They do stuff with them, unlike some accounts that just take pictures of their cars in a hushed garage with covers on. You can check out the Triple F collection on Instagram by clicking the link in the description below. So let's talk Regera. Koenigsegg is known for its insane hypercars with incredible performance, but in recent years they've wanted to branch out to some different model lines and cars that have different purposes. The Regera is really the first of those vehicles. It's still a pretty insane hypercar, but it's a more luxury and tech-focused Koenigsegg designed to provide a more comfortable driving experience than most Koenigsegg owners would be used to. Not that it really compromises on performance. This car still has a twin-turbo V8 mated to an electric motor for a total output of 1,500 horsepower, meaning this is just about as insane as every other Koenigsegg model, just a little nicer. It also does 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, and Koenigsegg says they're only going to make 80 of these for the entire planet. And today, I'm going to review this one. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the Regera and show you all the quirks and features of the luxury Koenigsegg. Then, I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Regera with the key, which is absolutely insane. This is the key. It is shaped like the Koenigsegg family coat of arms. Christian von Koenigsegg, the founder of the company, it's like his ancestral coat of arms, and that's also the Koenigsegg logo. They use it everywhere throughout the car, but the key is especially interesting. Now you flip it over and you can see the key has all sorts of buttons on it, and if you press these buttons, it opens all sorts of different things. So you see a button for the left door, a button for the right door. You press those, they open. You also have a button for the rear, the engine compartment, a button for the front, buttons to open everything in this car. You also have a button at the bottom, which is a ghost. The ghost is sort of a different Koenigsegg logo based on the manufacturing facility they're in, sort of like a special Koenigsegg touch. If you press the ghost button, everything opens at once. So if you want to have the car fully opened up to kind of display it, all you got to do, press that button and everything pops open. That's the key in this car. It automatically opens all the stuff. Doesn't just lock or unlock like your key. It does everything, and it's shaped like the Koenigsegg logo. Now, the insanity of the key in this car continues. In fact, I haven't shown you the craziest thing yet about the key, but I'm going to save that for when we get inside. And first, I have to talk talk about getting in and opening the door. Now, the door in this car is quite unusual. You walk up to it and there's no door handle. Obviously, you can press the key to open it, but you can also open it just from the outside, go under this panel, and you can see a little silver button. You push that and the door opens. So, how does the door open? Well, it's certainly strange. I'm going to press the button on the key fob and you can see the door sort of pushes itself out and then rolls forward almost like a half somersault. Take another look at that. You can see it kind of moves out and forward and down, and it is one of the stranger door opening mechanisms that has ever existed in any car. And you will also notice if you look closely that when you press the door opener button, it doesn't open right away. Instead, the power window actually rolls down first, and then the door does its weird opening mechanism. That's because the window has to roll down in order to clear the other bodywork, this front clamshell. If the window stays up, the two things will collide and it could damage the clamshell or the window. So the window rolls down, the door does its weird thing, and that's how you open the door in a Koenigsegg. And next up, once you get the door open, you can see some interesting quirks have become apparent, like for instance this warning label at the base of the door, which tells you not to open the door if you're parked near a curb, because the door could impact the curb and then get damaged just because of the strange opening procedure of the door. You can see this label here and this like pow graphic of it hitting the curb, although it's worth noting that Koenigsegg claims they have sensors in the door that will sense a curb. So if you're parked near a curb, the door will actually stop itself from going all the way down and damaging itself, which is a pretty cool touch. Another cool item revealed in this door sill area is this little plaque here, which lets you know exactly where the car was built. Koenigsegg is very famously Swedish, and it tells you the name of the town in Sweden and the coordinates, and it points to a map of Sweden and shows you exactly where this vehicle was created, which is a cool little plaque you only see if the door is open, and now you can see it in this video. Also with the door open, you have a great look at my very favorite warning label in this entire car, and that would be the one that says emergency hammer with a little arrow pointing. What exactly is that? Well, this car has electronic doors, as you can see, and if you get in an accident and damage the doors, you might not be able to get out very easily. So there is an emergency hammer located where the arrow is pointing that you can use to break the windows, the glass, and get yourself out of your Koenigsegg if it is damaged. I bet your car doesn't come with an emergency hammer, but this one does. And next up, we move inside the Regera to go over all of the interesting quirks and features in here. There are many, but I'm going to start with that crazy thing I mentioned was still coming about the key. So to the left of the steering wheel, there is a little like cubby in the Alcantara shaped like the Koenigsegg coat of arms. It is also shaped and sized like the key, and that's where you have to put the key in order to start the car. It will sense if the key is placed in there, and if it isn't, there is an immobilizer active that will not let you start the car. Even if you have it in your pocket, in the cup holder, whatever, it won't start. The key has to be placed here. It's magnetized, and you can see it sticks to this spot, and once it's in this spot, then you can actually turn the car on and start it up. So it's sort of like sticking in an old school key into a slot that fits it and then turning it, except in this case you're sticking a Koenigsegg coat of arms shaped key into a little cubby specially designed for it, and it recognizes that and lets you turn on the car. That is pretty cool. But anyway, once the key is in there, then the car does allow you to start it up, and you do that with a little button in the center console, once again shaped like the Koenigsegg coat of arms. Very beautiful engine start-stop button, as you can see. You press that and you turn on the car. Now, the first press of that button turns on EV sneak mode, and that basically means the car operates in electric power only, doesn't turn on the engine, and it only goes speeds up to 6 miles an hour. This doesn't sound very useful, and I thought it was kind of stupid until I actually started using it. Just moving the car around. A lot of people who own these have big collections, big garages. You want to kind of move the car around. You don't necessarily need to start it up every time and then turn it off. The engine's still cold. It's not good for it. You can sneak around using electric power only. And frankly, I've been doing that, moving the car in, out, whatever. It's actually pretty useful, surprisingly so. But anyway, you press the engine start-stop button a second time, and that fires up the actual engine, not just the little sneak mode. The real engine turns on, and it sounds unreal. It sounds, frankly, like a V8 muscle car. But anyway, once you're inside the car, if you want to close the door, you press this little button here with a door on it, and then the door closes. Obviously, there's one button like that for the driver's side, one button like that for the passenger side, so you can close the doors using those buttons once you climb inside. Also in this vicinity, you have a rather odd power window switch. It's this. It sort of looks like a normal switch, but then comes up at the end. Obviously, you pull it backwards or up to put the window up, or you push it down to put the window down. Two other buttons worth noting in this area. At the very base of this center button area, you press this and open up the rear lid, the engine compartment, so that's how you get back there from the interior. And at the very top of this center button area, you press this and open up the front compartment, which is a cargo area. I'll show you later. And those are the buttons that you need in here. Now, interestingly, you pull out, you'll look at this whole thing, and once again, you can see it looks like the Koenigsegg coat of arms. This entire button area with all of your important buttons in the center, they've integrated the coat of arms once again. And by the way, one other important item worth noting, if you're sitting in the car, the door is closed, and you want to get out, you do not press this center button to open the doors. This button only closes them. Instead, to get out, you just pull the door handle, which, by the way, looks like a normal door handle, but you can see the Koenigsegg coat of arms at the end of it one more time. Very cool integration there. But anyway, you pull it, and then the door does its little thing and opens right up. Basically, you're pulling it just starts the process. You don't actually have to pull it through the whole process. It'll do that automatically once you've just pulled the door handle. But anyway, next up, gone through some of the basics in the interior, I want to talk about a general overview in here. And I have to say, this is a nicer interior than the other Koenigsegg models I've seen. This is supposed to be the luxury grand touring Koenigsegg, and it does succeed, at least from an interior standpoint. It looks very luxurious. You have more leather, more Alcantara, more beautiful stitching, more aluminum in here than in other Koenigsegg models, and less like hard surfaces, carbon fiber, weight-saving stuff. This definitely does look like a more luxurious take on a Koenigsegg, which is exactly how they bill it, so it makes sense that it delivers on that. And by the way, speaking of materials, here's a crazy little touch you might not notice in this car. On the Koenigsegg coat of arms, you can see at the very top, there's this little logo. Almost looks like a person with his arms and legs outstretched, just a little tiny logo. Well, that logo is carried on to the screws in the interior in this car. You can see the screws have that logo on the top. So I guess if you wanted to unscrew that stuff, you'd need a special screwdriver that's shaped like that logo to actually unscrew them. Not very practical. But amazing attention to detail. This like special Koenigsegg logo appears on these screws, which could have otherwise just been left blank or simple screws. Not in this car. Every detail has been considered. And next up, being the luxury Koenigsegg, this car also has some surprisingly luxurious features you wouldn't really expect to see in a hypercar. For instance, there is a 360-degree top-down camera in this car, just like you'd see in like boring crossovers. The Koenigsegg has one too, which might seem like weird overkill, but the truth is visibility is pretty difficult in this car, and frankly, people who own these have big collections and they're always moving them around in tight spaces in their garages. It's nice to be able to see exactly where everything is, so that is a pretty cool touch. More and more supercars I'm driving are adding that, and it's cool to see it here. But you might be wondering, where exactly is the front camera? Because you look at the front of this car and you can see there's no immediately obvious camera. Where does it come from? And the answer is the Koenigsegg logo. When you turn on this camera system, the logo pops out and reveals the camera in there, and that's where they've hidden the front camera. Now, when you take the camera system off, start driving the car, the logo folds right back into place and just looks like a normal badge on the front of the car, hiding a camera underneath. Pretty cool. And next up, speaking of that screen in the center, let's talk through this screen because it's surprising to see an infotainment system in a hypercar, but this one has it, and frankly, it's surprisingly good. All right, to start with this screen, to go to the main menu, you press the Koenigsegg logo in the top center, of course, and that takes you to sort of like the main home screen. And from there are various different options that you can choose. For instance, press setup and you can adjust various different car settings like you would expect in most other cars, although some of the settings are a little Koenigsegg specific. You probably don't get them in your car. Next up, you have a performance tab where you can choose from a few performance settings, various different things you want to adjust, like your drive mode and that sort of thing. There's also a media tab here. You can tap that and then like connect your phone or a media player and play music. Interestingly, this car has Apple CarPlay, which is just crazy to think about. Obviously pretty standard in the normal car market, but in a hypercar, you wouldn't necessarily think they would bother to add it, but they have Apple CarPlay in the Koenigsegg. Pretty crazy. But as useful as this infotainment system is, there are also some rather odd quirks about it. For instance, you use this screen to adjust the climate controls, which makes sense, not really all that surprising, but when you go to adjust them, you can see temperature, it doesn't give temperatures like hot, cold, 60 degrees, 80 degrees. Instead, it's just like on and then max. And I guess you adjust the temperature, like closer to on would be colder and closer to max would be warmer, I think. That is kind of a strange way to do it, but you can't expect Koenigsegg to really get everything right with the infotainment. It's not exactly what they're focused on. Another odd thing about this infotainment system is all the stuff that's included in here. A lot of stuff you wouldn't really expect. For instance, seat controls are in here. You tap this icon on the bottom left and it pulls up seat controls, and that's how you move the seats around. There's no like physical controls on the door or the side of the seat. You control everything from the screen. You also have your power mirror controls in here. In the same icon, you can see power mirror controls, and yes, when you press these little arrows, it moves the mirrors on the doors just like you'd expect. There's no like physical little power mirror switch and dial like there is in your car. But probably the strangest control in this center screen is the headlights. You go into the controls and you can see here's how you turn on the headlights in your Koenigsegg. There's no little dial to the left of the steering wheel, not on the signal stalk. It's all done through the infotainment screen. And as a result, this screen, very, very important for this car, because if it breaks, not only do you lose music and settings and that sort of thing, but you lose the ability to move your seat or adjust your mirrors or even turn on your headlights. So the screen is quite important. Now, one other item at the base of the screen, you can see one dial sticking up in the center. This dial adjusts your volume. You can turn it obviously left or right, turns the volume up or down, or you press it in and that mutes the volume of the stereo. Pretty standard for a dial like that. And next up, another nice luxury feature in this car is a wireless charging system for your phone. You go over to the passenger side of the dashboard, you can see there are these little cubbies below it. You put your phone in there and that's a wireless charging pad for your phone inside of a Koenigsegg. It's just a crazy luxury touch in a hypercar like this. You also have an axle lifting system in here. Not really all that surprising, although I do like the placement of it. You press this little button on the steering wheel, easy thumb press, and then the front axle lifts up, which of course will help you if you're trying to clear like a steep driveway or a curb or something like that. You don't want to damage your car. You can lift it up with the press of a quick button on a thumb pad. That is better placement than most other automakers. When you have to go into a menu or whatever, it's nice to have the axle lifter so easily accessible. Also accessible on the steering wheel, you can see this button here is for cruise control, and yes, this car has cruise control. Another crazy thing about the Regera, but it is intended to be, again, the luxury hypercar, and so it has features like, well, cruise control, axle lifter, wireless charging pads, Apple CarPlay. Pretty crazy. Now, next up, another interesting thing on the steering wheel worth noting is the paddle shifters. This car has shift paddles, which normally wouldn't be strange, except this car doesn't have a traditional transmission with gears. Instead, it has like a single gear transmission that Koenigsegg calls direct drive. And the benefit of this is it allows them to save a little bit of weight. It's kind of trippy to drive the car with no gears, but that's what it has. Then I bring you back to the shift paddles. Why does a car with no gears have paddle shifters? And the answer is it just shifts between drive, reverse, and neutral. So you get in the car, it's in neutral, you push the up paddle to go into drive, or you push the down paddle a couple times to go into reverse, and that's what the paddle shifters are for. They don't really do anything other than select a gear when you're kind of sitting there, allowing you to go forward or backward. Kind of strange. Also in the vicinity of the steering wheel is the stalks for the turn signals and windshield wipers, which are amazing. The wiper stalk, the turn signal stalk, they look absolutely fantastic and they feel perfectly weighted. You press them and it just feels so luxurious, so high quality. This is how turn signal stalks, wiper stalks should feel. They are wonderful. Two interesting Easter eggs with these stalks. For one thing, the turn signal. You put on the turn signal, it turns on just like a normal car, although you can see there's a turn signal in the mirror that turns on in the shape of the Koenigsegg coat of arms. Look at that. It is blinking in the mirror, I guess, to let you know the signal's on or people in your blind spot, and it is shaped like the coat of arms. That is a pretty cool touch. And how about this? Over on the wiper stalk at the very end, you can see it says press with a little P. That's your parking brake. You push the end of the windshield wiper stalk to engage or disengage the parking brake in your Koenigsegg. Very bizarre placement. Certainly the strangest place I have ever seen the parking brake. That's where it is in this car. But anyway, next up, I want to talk over the gauge cluster, which is a large screen you can see right in front of the steering wheel. And back to the steering wheel real quick, this little dial over on the right adjusts the right half of the gauge cluster, and it scrolls through various different menus, letting you see different pieces of information, like your trip odometer, your overall odometer, your charge status, that sort of thing. You can find it all using this little dial on the wheel to scroll through. Now, over on the left side of the gauge cluster screen, this will show your media. So if you're listening to music, whatever, it will appear on there to let you know what you're listening to, just like a lot of normal cars have. That's pretty standard. Not quite so standard is the gauge in the middle, which has a lot of information on it. You can see the upper half is your speed, the miles per hour that you're going, which is also indicated with a large display right in the center of the screen, telling you how fast you're going. But there's a lot more information on here than just that. At the bottom, you can see it shows how much power you're using when you're driving around, telling you in kilowatts exactly how much power you're using. In the top center, you have the tachometer, which obviously measures your engine RPMs. That's at the top. You also have, the lower right, you have a boost gauge, which measures your boost. And at the lower left, you have a power gauge for the electric motors, telling you how much electric power you're using. It is a lot of stuff to fit into basically one central gauge. It's all there. It really is a lot of information, but it's there if you want to look at it while you're driving around. But anyway, next up, a few other interesting quirks and features in here. For one thing, the climate vents are absolutely beautiful. This aluminum trim, they look fantastic. And you move them with these little switches, which of course have the Koenigsegg coat of arms, the Koenigsegg logo at the end. That's how you move around the climate controls. A very nice look in this car. You also have some storage in this interior worth mentioning. There's a little door panel storage area. You can open this up and put some stuff in it, although keep in mind, the door opens like upward and 90 degrees, so don't put anything in there that might spill because it will damage this area. You also have a little more storage in the center here. This little pocket opens up for additional storage, and you even have cup holders in this car, 2 of them, driver and passenger cup holders. Again, this is the luxury Koenigsegg with its luxury touches like cup holders. Also worth noting, in the center, between the seat backs, you have this little oval-shaped light. When you open up the door, this light comes on to provide lighting for the interior when you're getting in or out. And frankly, I think it looks kind of cool. Now, right below that light, you have a little plaque, again in the Koenigsegg coat of arms shape, letting you know that this car is one of 80. That is pretty impressive, a very, very rare car. Now, just below that, you have a USB port, and this is the USB port you'd use for music. So if you want to plug in your device for music in the screen, this is where you'd plug it in. If you just want a charging USB port, it tells you use lower USB ports for charging. There are 2 additional USB ports between the seats. You can see right here, this car has a lot of different charge points. You have your wireless charging pads over on the dashboard, and then 2 more charging USB ports between the seats. It almost feels like a family crossover with how many devices you could charge in here. Again, I wouldn't expect anything less from the luxury Koenigsegg. Also between the seats in this area, you have a plaque that specifically tells who the car was built for. So the original owner orders this car and actually gets a personalized plaque letting every future owner and every passenger know this car was built for the owner. That is a pretty cool touch. And next up, we move outside the Regera to the front end, and specifically, I want to talk headlights. Some very interesting items in here, starting with the running lights, which are these little LED dots throughout the headlight housing. Koenigsegg says this is supposed to look like a constellation of stars, and I have to say, it does look like that. It's a really cool and very distinctive look, and I love that. Now, as for the headlights themselves, that would be the lower one of these little bulbs here. That's the headlight. The upper one is the turn signal, and you can see the turn signal comes on, flashes orange, pretty standard. But probably the most interesting thing in this headlight housing is at the bottom, you can see this little fan. That is to prevent condensation. Headlight housings often get like water coming in them, and then there's condensation. They fog up, they look terrible, but not in this car. You actually have a fan to ward off the condensation and keep these always looking clear. That is a pretty amazing touch. And next up, since we're talking lighting, let's talk about the rear lights in this car, which also look very cool. It's just this little thin strip in back. your entire lighting and turn signal assembly. Very small, very exciting back here. And since we're around back, there is a lot more to cover back here. I want to start with the massive rear diffuser, which is just absolutely huge and obviously contributes to the aerodynamics of the car, but it looks incredibly mean and aggressive, which is probably their intent. And one other crazy item back here, you can see even the license plate bracket is carbon fiber. This is something that they just have to stick on for regulatory purposes. You're never going to see the bottom of it because a license plate will always be on top of it, but even that little piece is carbon fiber. And it's not just a license plate bracket. Take a look at this. Press the charge port button on the key, and the license plate bracket folds away to reveal this car's charge port. That is an incredibly cool trick. Press the button again, and the license plate goes right back into place, and the charge port is covered up. Take another look at that. The charge port actually opens up from the license plate cover in back. And that means you could technically fold down your license plate while you're driving. You're just cruising along, you're about to go past a speed camera, you don't want a ticket, just press the button on your key fob, your license plate is folded down, and then you can just keep driving on. Not that Koenigsegg would ever condone such behavior, of course. And by the way, since I'm back here, I want to talk about the styling of this car. The front end design in the Regera looks like all the other Koenigsegg models, frankly, very similar to the others, but the rear end is definitely quite different. You can see the body line is almost like pulled out a little bit more to make the car seem a little bit more aerodynamic, and it definitely does have a distinctive shape from the other Koenigsegg's in back. Pretty easy to tell a Regera apart from the other Koenigsegg models. Now back here you also have this massive wing. You can see it is huge. It is also retractable. You can have it go up or down. You can control that in the infotainment screen, or it probably pops up at a certain speed, but this is your big adjustable rear wing in the Koenigsegg Regera. Two other items worth noting back here before we go inside this rear compartment. One is this little ghost logo in the back, as you can see. Like I mentioned, this is like a Koenigsegg secondary logo from their production facility. I guess they had taken over their production facility from a squadron of the Swedish Air Force, which used the ghost as their logo, and so Koenigsegg kind of adopted it as their own, and so it appears in a few places on each Koenigsegg model. You also have back here the rear window, although you can see it is tremendously tiny, very, very small rear window, and it's not particularly easy to see through. This is your view in the rear view mirror. You can see only a small little bit of what's behind you, which is another reason that camera system is so helpful in this car. But anyway, next we move on to the rear clamshell in this car, and it is huge, absolutely massive piece, and you can open it with the key. You tap the rear clamshell button on the key, and you can see the whole thing lifts up automatically, which is actually pretty nice because in other cars with giant rear clamshells, you have to do it yourself, and it's kind of nerve-wracking. It's a very large and expensive part. In this car, it all just happens with the push of a button, literally. Now, once you're in the clamshell, you can see the engine, and it is glorious. This car has a twin turbocharged V8, which itself makes 1,100 horsepower. Then it's mated to 3 electric motors, which obviously add even more power for a total of around 1,500 maximum horsepower, an unbelievable number. And again, this is supposed to be like the luxury Koenigsegg, but it still has 1,500 horsepower. It does 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, and it'll hit a top speed of 251 miles an hour. Obviously very impressive numbers for this car. Now back here in this engine compartment, we also have another one of my very favorite warning labels, and that would be the one letting you know to make sure there are no leaves or debris blocking this radiator opening before you drive this car, especially before you do high performance driving, because that would be really bad. It's kind of funny to see this little label here to make sure you're aware of the potential issues of blocking the radiator. You also have a few fluid caps back here in reservoirs, and Koenigsegg makes even fluid caps look cool. You can see these two prominently in the center of the engine bay that have the Koenigsegg logo on the top with aluminum. They look fantastic. You can add some fluid in there. Also over on the side here, this is where you add transmission transmission fluid and engine oil. These little caps, again, the Koenigsegg logo right in the center. These are more off to the side, not seen as easily, but very easy to access and clearly labeled in case you need to add either one of these fluids. And next up, since I'm opening up stuff in this car, I want to open up the front compartment, but first I'm going to close the rear compartment, which I can do with the key as I showed you. You press it and the rear compartment automatically glides back into place. The front compartment is also automated with the key. Press that, and now the front compartment opens up automatically. It is nice that all of this stuff is electronic, even though I'm sure it's more stuff that can break and blah, blah, blah. It's nice not to have to do this yourself and potentially damage stuff or even just get it dirty. But anyway, up front, this is your cargo area, your trunk in this car, and you can see it has a pretty distinctive U shape to it. The reason for that is the roof has a distinctive U shape to it, and the roof must fit inside this trunk. This car is technically a convertible, or at least a targa top. The roof can be lifted off and then placed in the trunk, and that's why the trunk is shaped this way and sized like this. Now, this bag that you see in the center of the trunk area isn't really a bag. Instead, it's like the protective case that you put the roof in when you store it in here so that it doesn't accidentally get damaged when you're driving it around. And by the way, another cool thing about storing the roof in the trunk, you can see there's a little label here letting you know that you should line up the roof with these arrows, but they aren't arrows at all. Instead, they're Koenigsegg coats of arms, just flipped upside down to look like arrows, which is a nice little touch. Now, you also have the Koenigsegg coat of arms under here on the VIN plaque, which is located in this front compartment. You can see the coat of arms sort of goes around this VIN, and that lets you know that this is a genuine Koenigsegg with the genuine Koenigsegg VIN plaque. And anyway, two other interesting items while I'm up here. One thing, Koenigsegg is kind of famous for making everything in-house. Everything in this car is built by Koenigsegg rather than by suppliers. And in some cases, that means they've named stuff kind of weirdly. Like, for instance, the hydraulic struts that keep the front trunk open are called the Koenigsegg Power Packer. It even says Koenigsegg Power Packer on the struts, which is kind of a stupid name, to be totally honest, but they put it there, and I guess that makes these struts cooler than normal ones. Also, one other item worth covering up here is the windshield wiper, which is located, as you can see, in the center of the windshield, pointing upwards, basically, unlike most other car wipers, which are at the base of the windshield horizontally. The reason Koenigsegg does this is for aerodynamics. When you think about it, a wiper horizontally at the base of the windshield, wind comes and hits that wiper, and it's not very good for aero, but putting the wiper like this, that's sort of the natural direction of wind flow, and that benefits this car's aerodynamics, or at least that's what Koenigsegg says. It seems to make sense to me. So the wiper in its natural resting position is always right there in the center of the windshield. Kind of strange. And so those are the quirks and features of the Koenigsegg Regera. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Regera. This is something. First thing you notice when you drive this car, and it was the same thing when I drove the Regera RS1, it's weighty. Not a heavy car, I want to be clear, but it feels substantial. Like some supercars, especially from a company like Koenigsegg that doesn't make that many vehicles, you know, they kind of have like a kit car feel to them. Not this thing. This car feels like substantial, like bank vault, like planted, like a weighty car. I don't know how else to describe it other than that it does not have a kit car feel to it. It is weird to me with no gears, you're not like downshifting to go, and it's weird that there's no paddle to like help you out a little bit more. Really, it's all done with throttle modulation, which I don't love because it means that you have to get more and more on the throttle in order to go faster rather than like downshift a little and you can kind of stay in a range of the throttle that makes you happy. Because, you know, a car like this is pretty valuable. It gets a little scary when you're 70% throttle. God. Oh my God. Wow, boy, it just becomes a total monster. Total monster. Wow. Wow. Oh my God. I can't see behind me right now whether I'm braking or accelerating. It has hit certain speeds. The wing has gone up and taken what little bit of back window I actually have. When you're braking, it slows at an unbelievable pace. That's actually a big surprise to me. You put on the brakes and it can really get you down fast. I don't know if the wing plays a role, the air or whatever, but it really feels like it's braking hard. It's just like really an angry sound to it, which is kind of funny because when you're at sort of lower throttle, it's not like that at all. But when you just start getting on it more and more and more, whoo! And that turbo sound coming off, that blow-off valve is like, whoa. You can really hear it very, very, very pronounced. I will say I prefer a car with more traditional gearing. It just makes it so much easier to access the power. You just pull a couple twists of the paddle and you're now, higher in the range and you can just tap the throttle. This thing you have to really commit to extra power, and I don't know if that's a commitment I really want to make. On the road, the car drives reasonably well, and I've always been kind of surprised about that when it comes to Koenigsegg's. They feel comfortable, and this being sort of like the luxury Koenigsegg, it certainly feels more comfortable than the Regera RS1 that I drove. That car certainly, you heard more stuff, you felt more stuff, it was a bit harder edged, but this car isn't not hard edged, it's just a little bit more luxurious. Obviously the interior materials are an improvement. It feels just a little bit calmer, a little bit nicer, a little bit more luxurious. I was skeptical of that when I read the power figure and the engine and the performance. I'm like, is this really gonna be a luxury car? Or is it just gonna be an Regera that sort of is dressed up in Alcantara and leather? And the truth is, no, it actually does feel a little bit more luxurious. It feels a little bit more drivable, but ultimately you're still sitting in a multi-million-dollar car with 1,500 horsepower, so you're still hearing a lot. It's not like you're driving an S-Class. It is interesting, this going and getting the power. It really just forces you to get pretty far down on the accelerator pedal, and it just kind of terrifies me. And I'm doing it. I'm getting in there, and you can feel it, and you can certainly hear it. But I don't want to be full throttle in this car, not for more than a second or two, because I know what it's capable of. Steering and handling is great in this car. Part of the benefit of the substantial feel of this car is you get a substantial feeling of steering and handling. So when you turn the steering wheel, it is pretty immediate, not quite the precision of, say, the Ferrari SF90 or some of the most precise cars, but the body roll is minimal, basically zero body roll, and it just feels so planted. When you're making turns in this car, you have so much confidence in the car, which is kind of a surprise to me. You think Koenigsegg, you think like this intimidating, scary hypercar manufacturer. This car actually provides a pretty good level of confidence when you're going around corners. You feel like you can kind of toss it around without really getting into too much trouble. I actually feel more safe going around a corner fast in this car than I do accelerating hard. Accelerating hard, because I can't really gear down and I have to just stab the throttle, it's a little dangerous, but cornering is just great. The car is very planted, feels tremendously stable, and feels like it's absolutely glued to the road in a way that not every supercar, hypercar really does. And so that's the Koenigsegg Regera, the first example of Koenigsegg branching out beyond just insane hypercars to make something a little more luxurious. Although truthfully, this is still a pretty insane hypercar. It's reasonably calm for a hypercar, but maybe not quite as luxurious as Koenigsegg want it to be. It's hardly an S-Class or anything similar to that. It still feels pretty crazy and Koenigsegg-y to me. But I'm thrilled that I had the chance to check out the Regera, and now it's time to give it a DOUGSCORE. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, I've never loved the current Koenigsegg designs. They're striking and head-turning, of course, but not quite what I'd consider truly beautiful, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Acceleration 0 to 60 is fast, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Handling is excellent, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Fun factor is crazy, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and again, that one's obvious, 10 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 48 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The Regera is surprisingly well equipped, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is normal for a car like this, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Quality is high, reliability is probably a bit of a question mark, but everything is so nice and well thought out inside. Attention to detail is amazing, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Practicality is low, as you might expect given the value and lack of real storage here, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Finally, value, and these things are unbelievably expensive, which will of course hurt value, but also they hold their value tremendously well. I'll compromise and give it a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 24 out of 50. Added up, and the DOUGSCORE is 72 out of 100, which places it here against rivals, and the Regera is right with them all. Chiron, Devo, Sabre, LaFerrari, Senna, other Koenigseggs, it's right up there with the best. No surprise, because the Regera is one of the best.